Hi, this is part 4 of the Gigantic series where we're learning about drawing and sculpting in Curvy 3D. In this part, we'll be looking at creating a hand model and posing it into place. So as before, we're loading a front and a side image as image planes in Curvy. And we're basically going to trace over this to make our forms. So with the lathe object, I'm going to sketch probably the hardest part, which is the palm. So trying to get the front and the back of the hand, and then shift the curves into the tallest point of the palm, rotate it to sort of follow the line of the bones, and then drawing on the sides of the palm. I say this is the trickiest one because the rest of them are fairly symmetrical. Drawing on a wrist, just for a sense of scale and context. I probably won't keep this wrist later on, but it just helps while I'm sketching it out. Again, front, back and sides. The next trickiest bit is probably the thumb, because we can't see all of the shapes. So I'm drawing a large intersecting object for the root of the thumb with lots and lots of crossover. You can overlap your models as much as you like, and quite often the more overlap the better. It gives it a smoother edge. We'll be merging them later anyway to make it smoother, but overlapping is good. Again, moving the curves in sort of side view to make them line up with where the bone might be under the skin. Now we're not drawing the next joint, again overlapping plenty at either end, and rotate that into place. Drawing the front and the back, and using the soft move tool just to drag those curves into place. If you want to see what's happening with the soft move tool more closely, you can press A to turn on the wireframe mode, and you can see the individual points which control the curve. You can also get this from the top menu bar, the little wireframe balls in the middle. So for the thumb, I've left a bit of a dent where the nail bed will lie. Just trying to shape it to match my drawing. I'm using the ruler tool to completely cut off some sections of the curve and make them completely straight, and then pressing S to smooth the curve again. Now I'm using the simple curve ruler, which you can drag along a curve along a small part, and it'll smooth that small part with a very smooth rounded shape. Now for the nail, it's a flat object, so I'm going to use a loft. The first line of the loft goes along the shape. Again, using the simple curve ruler to round it off. Then we draw the bottom and the top. The bottom and the top curves, I just need to move those into position because they're originally placed on the grid. And obviously our thumb isn't on the grid, so we need to tweak that. These are going to be very small details in the final model, so they don't have to be too precise. But even if they're just a few pixels, it's worth trying to get it right. This time I'm using ellipse arc which redraws the curve with a ellipse segment. Again, a nice smooth curve. And increasing the depth to make the nail have a little bit of thickness. None of these shapes have to be too precise. If you're going to sculpt them later, they just need to have the right proportions, approach the right sort of volume, and the right sort of position and alignment. But if the object can be really far in the background, then potentially wouldn't even merge it or sculpt it. You'd just leave it as is. So the fingers are probably the simplest part. They're just slightly bulging at the ends lathes, bulging where the joints are. As always, overlapping is good because it'll give a smoother edge between the objects. And I'm going to reuse the thumb tip with the nail as a fingertip to save some time and make things more consistent. So I'm grouping the fingertip onto the thumb tip by dragging it in the groups panel and then double clicking on the tip and renaming it something more useful and rotating it into place. Notice I'm turning on and off the snap rotation in the middle of the top bar. So with snap on, you're rotating in chunky increments, which makes it easy to rotate 90 degrees and 45 degrees and so on. But if you want to do fine tuning, you can turn off the snap, or you can hold shift while you rotate to turn it off. Just tweaking the shape of that tip. And when it's ready, dragging it into place on the end of the finger. Now again, in the interest of reusing things, I'm going to group all three of those parts into a single finger and rename that finger and align it on top of the palm. And then give it a slight rotation to round it off. Notice if you rotate and you're holding down the mouse where the joints meet, it'll rotate around that point. You don't have to rotate around the little gizmo arrows. You can rotate around any point you like just by starting your drag there. Next we're going to copy the fingers, make the little finger a bit stubbier and thinner. And then shrink out the other two fingers to match. So we've got a long finger in the middle, two similar but quite long fingers, and then a little finger on the side. I'm just tweaking the palm curves just to give it a bit more arch on the back and hollow out on the front. There we go. We can drag the little boxes on the end of the widget tool to scale in one direction, or you can drag the yellow box in the middle to scale in all directions. As always, I'm using the W to move, E to rotate, and R to scale keys on my keyboard, and T to soft move. So my fingers are on W, E, R, T. So now I'm fairly happy with that hand. It's got the right proportions, the right sort of volumes. All of the intersections and joins, it doesn't matter if they look a bit messy because they're going to be cleared up later. Just putting in one more lathe which acts as a bridge between the palm and the thumb. I'm just going to add another couple of curves to that using the auto lathe tool, which takes your existing curves and makes more curves out of them. So there I'm using the auto lathe just to make a side curve. And tweaking the curves in both views to get them into place. Now I'm going to tidy up. I'm going to group everything under the wrist and then under the palm. So for small objects, I wouldn't worry about giving them a name. I'd just group them and then name the group to something sensible. And you can group things either by dragging them onto another part in the groups window, or by selecting several objects and pressing Ctrl-G to make a new group. So something like this hand, it's taken a little while to make this time, but we could reuse it on other models. So I've loaded up my giant, and he's ready posed with a blob for a hand, and we're going to replace that blob with a more detailed hand model. I find with rotating, using lots of different viewpoints helps, because your viewpoint can give you a different axis to rotate along. Trying to get the hand a similar sort of size to the face. And then I'm copying and doing a paste mirrored to make the hand for the other side of the body. Again, rotating this to match where I'm going to put the other arm. And now I don't really need the wrist part anymore, so I'm dragging off the palm and then deleting the wrist, deleting the original blob. And now we need to pose the sword carrying hand. So I'm switching now to two 3D views, whereas before we were using orthographic, like front, left, top, bottom, with no perspective. Now I'm switching into the perspective views, the perspective view itself and the assistant view, which they're both, you can rotate the camera any way you like, and they draw your objects in perspective. But it's handy to have multiple views, because you can use one view to change the rotation axis. So when you've set a view up and you don't use the rotation gizmo, when you're dragging from somewhere else on the screen, it'll rotate it around where your screen's looking. So basically it lets you choose the axis of rotation to any direction you like. So I made a little cylinder here to use as the handle to help line up the fingers. And rotating to different viewpoints makes it easier to line up everything. So here I'm rotating it to a viewpoint where the axis of all the fingers' rotation, when the fingers are rotating up and down, is lined up with this viewpoint. So now when we do rotations, they'll be perfectly in line with where the fingers should be rotating. So I'm just selecting through and closing the grip. Each time rotating from where I think the joints intersect the most. So now for easy selection, I'm using the perspective view to select, and the assistant view to rotate. So using the combination of views, I get easy selection and easy rotation in the right place. Just tweaking the lower bits of the fingers so they don't overlap too much. With the Move tool, you can hold down Shift and drag, and it'll push the object in and out of the screen. So then you in a single view, you can select and then pull or push an object in or out of the screen by holding Shift with the Move tool selected. Now we just need to get the thumb rotated into place. So again, I'm rotating the view until it's lined with the axis I want to rotate on. And then rotating the parts of the thumb into place. And if I'm happy with that from the pose, I can finish aligning it with the rest of the arm, and then we're done. So if something aligns in two different viewports, then it should be aligned in all of the viewports. And there we have the giant holding his sword. And that's ready for sculpting later on. And here's viewed from the camera, we get the heightened perspective, and that particular fist is going to be punching straight out of the camera, so it's going to have to be detailed later on. And there's the final image, so we can see the fist coming out of the screen. Come back for the next part, we'll be starting sculpting.